Now, a little bit more about today's performance. This is brought to us thanks to the Illinois Humanities Road Scholars Program. So they give us a lot of support. They help present programs like this all across the states. And so it's thanks to their generosity that we're able to do this tonight. There will be a survey at the end of the performance tonight. If you have a moment, it really does help us out if you actually fill out that survey for us. So keep an eye on that. And we do try to keep all our programs at the History Center free, but we'll post a link to our donations in the chat. We never require it, but we always appreciate any money that you're able to spare to help us do more things like this. Just a few words about Chris to get us started, then I'll let him take it away. Chris is a singer and songwriter and folklorist with a natural affinity for American roots music. A master of bottleneck slide guitar, he weaves original, contemporary, and traditional songs and narratives into a compelling and entertaining portrait of the history and lifestyle of the Midwest. His 2016 project, Oh Freedom, Songs of the Civil Rights Movement, was released on Martin Luther King Jr. Day and charted at number 6 of the national folk charts. His one-man show, Abraham Lincoln in Song, received the endorsement of the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission, and that CD reached number 10 on Billboard's Bluegrass album chart. So he is, as you can tell, you'll soon see, a very talented musician. So please, without further ado, Chris, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Emma. I am so happy to be here, courtesy of Illinois Humanities. Today I'm going to be sharing some stories, some music, and some information about historic instruments of Illinois. Now, Illinois was first settled as our nation was expanding. We were the West, the wilderness, if you will. And the earliest music in our area was made using homemade instruments, things folks could carry in on their backs. Things like rhythm instruments like the bones, maybe an old fiddle, and of course, the ever popular jaw harp. But as Illinois began to develop, musical instruments would play an important role in socializing and in recreation. Now, pianos were expensive and rare, and most stringed musical instruments, which is what I'll be talking about today, were either homemade or made by local artisans. And here is one that is a perfect example of that very thing. This is an antique hammer dulcimer built here in Illinois by a man named Daniel Van Antwerp right around 1880. And let me show you what it looks like. It's a trapezoidal shaped box with about 47 steel strings, or iron in the original form, stretched across the top. It's played with a pair of wooden hammers and mallets, and it has a sharp, bright, ringing sound folks describe as a cross between a harp and a piano. Now, it's a perfect instrument to be used in an old string band or, say, for a square dance. So let me give you a taste of what this would sound like by playing an old song that was well known around Illinois, an old waltz tune called the Westphalia Waltz. There you go. Now that doesn't sound too bad for being 140 years old, does it? All right. Now, in the 1830s, a white musician by the name of Joel Sweeney began to perform on a brand new instrument, the banjo, an instrument that had evolved from an old traditional African instrument called a banjar or a kora, and he had learned it from a black musician down in Virginia. Now, banjos would become immensely popular. By 1850, they're the most popular instruments in all of Illinois. They would become the basis for dance music, fiddles and banjo combination. That would be the basis for minstrel music and the foundations for what would ultimately become popular American music. Now, the one I've got here was built in Chicago probably in the 1890s. It is very typical of the instruments you saw in Illinois from about 1850 onward. So you've got 5 strings by now. The original ones were 4. You've got frets. The original banjos, of course, were fretless. The back of the banjo is open. There's no back like a modern day banjo. The top of it was made of skin. But most important of all, the strings were gut, not steel. So it had a completely different sound than a modern day banjo. Now, I want to do a tune for you that I actually wrote for this instrument. It was inspired by the writings of a local historian, John Holwis. He wrote a book about a local gangster named Kelly Waggle, and I wrote this tune based on his story. This is an instrumental called The Bootlegger. Now that's a completely different sound than a modern day banjo, and for some reason I don't understand, I just love that plunky old time sound. But that's the way they started out. And again, a Chicago built instrument dating to about 1890. Now following the Civil War, things began to evolve in Illinois as waves of immigrants began to appear. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and for the first time, we have the means and basis for manufacturing stringed instruments like never before. We also have things like new inventions like steam-powered printing presses to print music, manufacturing facilities that could build hundreds and hundreds of instruments instead of one at a time, and the transportation systems like steamboats and railways to distribute them throughout the area. Now, Illinois being a state that was dominated by waterways initially and then railways later, well, that helps move our state to the forefront. Now, right about this time, a new instrument was beginning to move to the forefront as well, the guitar. Now, up until the Civil War, the guitar was primarily a ladies' parlor instrument. Just like the banjo, it would have been gut strung, and they were very small and very narrow. Now, after the war, it would begin to gain more and more popularity, particularly as American popular music began to grow. Things really take off after the Great Fire of 1871, when Chicago quickly becomes the national center for musical instrument manufacturing. Matter of fact, it would later be said that Chicago built guitars the way Detroit built cars. They also built mandolins, banjos, pianos, harps, all sorts of stringed musical instruments. And by the 1880s onward, the king of all the companies based in Chicago was Lyon and Healy. Matter of fact, by 1880, they were the world's largest instrument building company. They had started out in 1868 building only pianos, but would expand into all sorts of instruments over the years. At the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, Lyon and Healy would have a two-story display with terracotta and gold, where they would display all of their award-winning instruments. And through the entire run of the fair, for about 6 months, they had live performances demonstrating their instruments. It made a huge difference. Now, this guitar I'm holding here is one of theirs. This is a Washburn 1897 style new model 145 acoustic guitar. Now, you'll notice it's much smaller than a modern day guitar is, but it's beginning to approach that. While it was originally set for gut strings, I have been able to put steel strings on it due to the nature of the way they built them. And it's the very first guitar that really caught my imagination and got me interested in locating and restoring old instruments. Now, I'll tell you the story about this guitar through a song that I wrote about that very experience, and give you a chance to hear it as well. This is a tune called the Washburn 1897 style new model 145. That's a mouthful, believe me. Bought her from a riverboat pilot who was selling it for a friend. Gave me $150 just to take it off his hands. The battered ghost of an old guitar most folks would throw away. Once a fancy painted lady, now the picture of decay. I could see beyond the damage, the splits and cracks and wear. It'd been a well-made instrument, built with craftsmanship and care. And as I reached inside the sound hole to wipe away the grime, I read a Washburn 1897 style new model 145. Brazilian rosewood back and sides, cut from old growth trees, trimmed in herringbone and pearl like some ancient Grecian frieze. On the back was split and falling off, parts are rattling round inside. That old Washburn 1897 style new model 145. Some things they are worth saving, some things worth fighting for. Something to hold on to as the winds howl at your door. Now, I believe guitars have songs in them. Heck, some might even have a soul. Fixing up this beat up box became my greatest goal. And as the years went by, I slowly worked until I made it come alive. That a Washburn 1897 style new model 145. That a Washburn 1897 style new model 145. There you go. Now you'll notice this is beginning to sound like a modern guitar. The size of the body is small, but the Brazilian rosewood, which they were making with at the time, really gives it a full, deep, rich sound. Interestingly enough, this guitar, built right around 1897, somewhere between there and 1905, say, it has a steel rod in the neck, which was way ahead of many other people. It's a fine, fine little instrument, I'll tell you what. It would have been comparable to a Martin guitar of that era as well. Now, by the turn of the century, Chicago is becoming the hub of the nation with its trailways and eventually its hard roads. And it becomes the largest producer of stringed musical instruments in the world. That's spurred on largely because of the advent of the catalog industry, Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Wards. This revolutionizes life, particularly in rural America. All of a sudden, you could buy a wide range of products shipped right to your door, wherever you lived. And musical instruments were a big part of that. Now, companies like Regal, Washburn, Lyon and Healy, S.R. Stewart, Stromberg, Vossinet, and American Conservatory, all based out of Chicago. But since Chicago was also a big immigrant center, you had this massive pool of labor that came with skills from the old country. So there were hundreds of small independent shops as well. One in particular was run by two brothers from Norway, the Larson brothers, and they would revolutionize the acoustic guitar. Now, right about this time, life is getting faster. Sounds are getting louder with mechanization, with automobiles coming on, with railroads. And music is the same way. It's all about chasing loud. They want bigger, they want louder. And this is one of the guitars that the Larsons built. It's a Larson 551. Now, you'll notice it's even bigger than the one I played. It's about 15 inches across the top. This one has a number of uncommon advances. They're the first people to not only X-brace the guitar, which makes it stronger, but build it in such a way that it's designed to take the stress of steel strings, which makes it significantly louder. Now, Larson brothers were excellent craftsmen. They used the finest materials, Brazilian rosewood back and sides again, spruce top, ebony fingerboard, very beautiful inlays and craftsmanship. And it was an instrument that became particularly popular on a Chicago institution, the WLS Barn Dance, or the National Barn Dance. Now, this was, in its day, the most popular country music Opry-style show in the world. Bigger than the Grand Ole Opry, bigger than the Louisiana Hayride. It was where folks like Lou LaBelle and Scotty and Patsy Montana and Gene Autry and Bradley Kincaid all played. Many of them, they played the Larson guitar because in its day it was the biggest and loudest instrument you could find. Now, this is one that would have been very typical of the kind of guitars they would have been playing. The sound is going to be bigger, and I'm going to demonstrate this instrument by playing a song that Bradley Kincaid himself performed on the WLS Barn Dance. Now, they used to call Bradley Kincaid the Kentucky Boy. He had been born in the mountains of Kentucky, left as a young man and came to Chicago, and eventually became one of the stars of the WLS Barn Dance. But every summer, he'd go back down there and scout out and hunt up more old songs which he would bring back and perform on the show. In these days, see, country music was still more hillbilly music or cowboy music than what we now think of as country music. So let me do a song Bradley Kincaid used to play. It's called Some Little Bug Is Gonna Get You. In these days of indigestion, it is oftentimes a question as to what to eat and what to leave alone. For each microbe and bacillus has a different way to kill us, and in time they'll always claim us for their own. There are germs of every kind in any food that you can find in the market or up on the bill of fare. And drinking water is just as risky as the so-called deadly whiskey, and it's often a mistake to breathe the air. For some little bug is going to find you someday. Some little bug will creep behind you someday. Then he'll call for his bug friends. All your trouble ends. Some little bug is going to find you someday. Now the inviting green cucumber gets most everybody's number, while the sweet corn has a system all its own. And though the radish seems nutritious, its behavior is quite vicious, and a doctor will be coming to your home. Now eating lobster, cooked or plain, is only flirting with ptomaine, while an oyster sometimes has a lot to say. And those clams we eat in chowder make the angels sing the louder, for they know that we'll be with them right away. Now when cold storage vaults I visit, I can only say, what is it? Makes poor mortals fill their system with such stuff. Now for breakfast, prunes are dandy, if a stomach pump is handy, and a doctor can be found quite soon enough. Now eat a plate of fine pig's knuckles, friends, the headstone cutter chuckles, while the gravedigger makes a note upon his cup. Eat that lovely red bologna, why, you'll wear a wood kimono as your relatives start scrapping out your stuff. For some little bug is going to find you someday. Some little bug will creep behind you someday. Then he'll call for his bug friends. All your trouble ends. Some little bug is going to find you someday. Now all those crazy foods we mix will float us across the river Styx and start us climbing up the Milky Way. And for these big courses, meet a hearse and 6 black horses. So before they eat, some people always pray. Now luscious grapes breed appendicitis, and the juice leads to gastritis. So there's only death to greet us either way. And fried liver's nice, but mind you, friends will soon ride close behind you, and the neighbors then will have nice things to say. For some little bug is going to find you someday. Some little bug will creep behind you someday. Eating juicy sliced pineapple makes the sexton dust the chapel. Some little bug is going to find you someday. Eat some sauce, they call it chili. On your breast they'll place a lily. Some little bug is going to find you someday. There you are, the Larson Brothers 551 acoustic guitar. Very much getting to the point of a modern day acoustic, just a few years before they invent the dreadnought, and this is very much one of the precursors to that instrument. Now, the early 20th century is an explosive time in Chicago, especially in the music instrument building category. Companies buy one another out, they merge, they split, they remerge, and a wide range of activities are going on. This is the high water mark of the golden age of Chicago instrument building. In 1904, the Lyon and Healy Company purchases a bankrupt company from Indianapolis, Regal Musical Instruments, and moves it up to Chicago. Then in 1908, they spin it off as an independent company, just known as Regal. Regal goes on to be one of the largest manufacturers of guitars, banjos, and mandolins in the world. As a matter of fact, many of the instruments sold by Washburn as Washburn instruments were really built by Regal. And this is going on all the time. They're sharing parts. They may buy bodies from one company. They may buy tuning machines from another. They may change and hybridize as they go along. Now, Regal would make high-end instruments, but what they would specialize in would largely be serviceable, inexpensive instruments. And this is one of theirs right here. This is a Regal double-point mandolin. It's not made of rosewood or mahogany, which would have been the higher quality woods. It's made out of birch, but it's stained to look like mahogany. Now, birch is a local wood. It was fairly inexpensive, very easy to work, and it makes a very bright, clear-toned instrument. But it was very inexpensive. There we go. So let me give you a taste of this instrument. And while I do that, before I do that rather, I will mention that in the 1980s I was involved documenting the last of the pre-radio generation of musicians in rural Illinois. And time after time, as I interviewed these folks and they showed me family albums going back to the late 1800s, it was these type of inexpensive instruments that most folks in rural Illinois were playing on. So it really got the music into people's hands. So here is an old-time song that came out of the Appalachian Mountains and would have traveled to Illinois with our very earliest pioneers, especially the ones coming in on the National Road, the Southern Route. It's a tune called The Cumberland Gap. Well, now lay down, boys, take a little nap. We're all going down to the Cumberland Gap. Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap. Hey, we're all going down to the Cumberland Gap. Well, now I got me a gal in the Cumberland Gap. She's got a baby who calls me Pap. Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap. Hey, we're all going down to the Cumberland Gap. Well, now me and my wife's Pap, we all live in the Cumberland Gap. Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap. Hey, we're all going down to the Cumberland Gap. So there you go, a very serviceable instrument with a clear, bright sound, and it would have been very reasonably priced. I should mention Lyon and Healy sold an identical instrument, only built out of the highest quality materials, ebony fingerboard, Brazilian rosewood back and sides, but in all likelihood was in fact made in the Regal manufacturing facility. Now, it's at this point where Regal and the guitar is really moving into the forefront. And Regal leads the charge with the invention of what we now call the $2 guitar. This is an incredibly inexpensive instrument that might cost a day or two's wages as opposed to a month or two's wages for a higher instrument like, say, a Gibson or a Martin. They made countless house brands as well. So they didn't just sell them under the name of Regal. If you had a local music store in Peoria, why, you could have your music store's logo put on the top of a guitar that they made. Even drugstores would sell homemade or factory-made guitars that way. Now, this instrument here is one of them. This is one of my very favorite little guitars. I like to refer to this as the potato chip guitar, and I'll tell you why here. First of all, I would tell you it is an inexpensive Chicago-made instrument, almost certainly by Regal. It is, once again, birch, dyed to look like mahogany. The top of the instrument is spruce, which is a great soundboard wood. The fingerboard is walnut, which is a step up. It's not the lowest, cheapest wood they can get, but it's still not an ebony or a rosewood. Now, I bought this guitar in pieces in a yard sale over in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, several years ago. When I found it, it was stuck off on the ground. The back was completely off of the instrument and broken into two pieces. The strings, however, were still fully tightened. And as a result, with no back to hold the guitar together, it had warped and pulled the top up into a big curve like a potato chip. And the hips of the guitar, they had pulled completely out. It looked like a giant pear-shaped instrument. And I bought it just for the tuners and the wood, and I didn't think I'd ever restore it. And I was walking away, and the lady from the yard sale, she calls out, she says, "Hey, you gonna try to fix that thing?" And I said, I might. And to my utter surprise, when I took it home, I started to kind of put it back together, and sure enough, it came back into shape. Now, since it has been so radically damaged and is not a high quality collectible guitar, I decided to modify it a little bit. It would have originally just had a bridge that sat on the top and a tailpiece that had strings going all the way back, what we call a floating bridge. That has less tension on the top of the guitar. But I went ahead and X-braced this as opposed to the standard ladder bracing, which is cheaper and easier to make. And then I put a fixed bridge on it. And I ended up with a guitar that has an amazing sound. Now, you might remember when I did the song about the Washburn 1897 style guitar, I threw in the line about I believe guitars have songs in them, and I do. New instruments inspire new ways to play, they inspire new thoughts, they inspire new melodies. And as I was finishing this guitar up, I was working on the final finish and setting it up to make sure that it fit right and played right. And I started noodling around on it just to make sure that the action, the string height, was right. And a song began to come out. Matter of fact, I've never actually finished the finish on this guitar. But this is the song that came out. It's an instrumental piece that I just love, and we'll play it for you on this little $2 guitar. This is called Ma Belle. So once again, pretty impressive sound for merely $2. Now, as things go forward, that's pretty typical of what you're going to see. More and more mass-produced instruments, less quality, but less cost. And that's the whole idea. And it gets the music out into people's hands more effectively. Now, another big player in this era, based in Chicago, is the Stromberg Vossinet Company. Now, they started out in 1890 as the Groschel Mandolin Company up in Chicago, and in 1921 they changed their name to Stromberg Vossinet. Now, they're well known for making very fancy but fairly inexpensive instruments, like this one. This one was designed to take advantage of the Hawaiian music craze, and you'll notice that there is a stenciled painting on it, and I'll try and get you up so you can see that, of a Hawaiian scene. That actual image will be reproduced thousands and thousands of times. The early ones are silk screened. Eventually it will be a decal. But it's all part of what we call picture guitars. Most of those are inexpensive, but they're highly decorated like this. And you also have this lovely, what we refer to as a mother of toilet seat, plastic perloid material that makes the finger pick, the finger guard, and the fretboard. Now, this guitar, though, is made out of solid mahogany. And mahogany is a higher quality wood, and it gives you a different, richer tone. Again, a surprisingly good sound for a small-bodied instrument. Now, let me use this instrument to do an old song that was written right about the time this guitar was built. It's an old gospel hymn called Farther Along, and I'll use the sawed-off top of an old bottle to play what's called bottleneck slide on this instrument. But I think you'll recognize this tune. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be so all the day long, when there are others living among us, never molested, though in the wrong. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brothers, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, leaving our homes so lonesome and drear, then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brothers, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brothers, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Now, the years leading up to the Depression are years of experimentation of all kinds in the Chicago industries. There are unusual instruments that are built and tried out. For instance, this little instrument. This is called a mandolinetto. This is made by the American Conservatory Company. It's a fairly high-end one, too. Spruce top, ebony fingerboard, Brazilian rosewood back and sides. But what it is a tiny mandolin on a guitar-shaped body. But it's got surprisingly good tone and playability. Now another that was very unusual was this. This is a Lion & Healy 1201 model guitar. The unique thing about this one is that it has 9 strings, not 6, not 12. The bottom 3 strings are single strings like a regular guitar, but the top 3 strings are doubled like a 12-string guitar. Now, they were part of a very short-lived experiment trying to capitalize once again on that Hawaiian music craze. And it's a very inexpensively made instrument, flat sawn birch, ladder braced. Now the fingerboard on this is walnut, which is a step up. A lot of the really cheap guitars would use what they called ebonized maple. The fingerboard would be made of maple, but it would be treated with an acid treatment to make it turn black. Not too many of those survive because it eventually eats up the wood. But this particular guitar only was built in 1920 and 1921, and it was fairly expensive for the time, $17.88, which was a very high cost at the era. Now, it didn't really survive. Not too many of them were made. You didn't see too many of them, but one Chicago blues artist, Daddy Stovepipe, played this guitar, and you can hear it on his 78 recordings. I'm going to do a piece of music that I wrote on this guitar for an exact replica I had built by a luthier named Tony Klassen. But I wanted to have an instrument that I could take advantage of all of those 9 strings, that unique sound, and I came up with this. So this is a song called The Last Day of Winter. There you go. And once again, it's that birch body that gives it that bright, shimmering tone. So even though it's an inexpensive guitar, it still has a beautiful, unique voice. Now, in 1931, the Stromberg-Vossinet Company evolves. It becomes known as Kay Musical Instruments, a name I bet most of you recognize. Now, Kay goes on to develop a wide range of affordable musical instruments, including some of the very first electric guitars, as a matter of fact. They'll produce thousands and thousands of instruments for the catalog company. They built the Silvertone instruments that Sears and Roebuck sells. They built Del Oro instruments for Montgomery Wards, and they built Old Craftsman instruments for the Spiegel catalog. They also built countless other house brands. I've got one of those right here. Now, this is a Kay instrument that was sold under the Supreme brand. And it's a little bit different than the ones I've shown you up to this point. This is what they call a super jumbo. And it's 17 inches all the way across the body. That's a big guitar. And it has a surprisingly good tone. Now, the top is solid spruce, but Kay instruments were known for laminated backs and sides. As a matter of fact, that was their big sales pitch. They can't crack. So you have 3 layers of mahogany sandwiched together. It makes for a very solid instrument. Now I have to play it actually in this capoed position, but let me drop the capo just a second so you can hear the tone of this guitar. That huge body gives it a really full, rich sound, but still quite bright. A lot of low end in there, but a gorgeous, uncommon sound. I want to use this to do a song that was written right about the time this guitar was built. This one dates to the 1940s. And down in southern Illinois in that era, actually just before that era, there was a gang called the Shelton Gang. They were responsible for illicit alcohol and gambling and prostitution all the way from southern Illinois, what we call Little Egypt, all the way through St. Louis and up to Peoria. They would bring in alcohol from Cuba, smuggle it up through Florida, and then sell it to Al Capone in Chicago. They got so popular and made so much money that they eventually just retired. But they'd also made so many enemies that one by one, they were murdered off. Well, this is a song written after Carl Shelton, the leader of the gang, was shot and murdered in 1947. The song was actually written in 1948 by his brother Earl Shelton and a local musician, Fred Nelson. They would record the song and it would become a minor country hit. Matter of fact, you can still Google it and find the Life magazine article talking about the song and the Shelton Gang. So it seems like a fine tune to kind of pair up with this jumbo guitar. So this is The Death of Carl Shelton. Near a little country schoolhouse in the county known as Wayne. It was down in Pond Creek Bottoms, one day a man was slain. He was riding on the highway to see about some grain. When they shot him from an ambush, Carl Shelton was his name. Now little did he know this morning he started out. These hoodlums would be waiting there along this murder route. He had no one to warn him, he feared no rude man's harm. As he rode his Jeep that morning to work down on the farm, he left his dear old mother in sorrow there alone, living down near Marion in her little country home. May the angels hover over her, for she hasn't long to stay, in hopes she'll meet her darling in a better world someday. Near the county seat of Fairfield, they could not find the bill. But we all know that it's not right our fellow man to kill. They even shot him where he fell and left him there to die. This mystery will be solved one day in the courthouse in the sky. He had 4 loyal brothers, 2 sisters and a wife, to mourn his sad departure the day they took his life. In Maple Hill they laid him so peacefully there at rest, but his memory it still lingers with the ones that knew him best. He left his dear old mother in sorrow there alone, living down near Marion in her little country home. May the angels hover over her, for she hasn't long to stay, in hopes she'll meet her darling in a better world someday. The Death of Carl Shelton on the Super Jumbo K acoustic guitar. Well, I've got just one more instrument to share with you, and I hope you're enjoying the music as much as I'm enjoying sharing it with you tonight. This one. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about chasing loud as the time goes by. After all, the world is moving faster. It's getting louder. We have radio. We have all sorts of industrialization going. And the idea is to make instruments that are louder and louder as well. This being before the days of electric guitars. And this was an instrument that they came up with to do that very thing. This is called a dobro, and it was actually invented in California in 1926 by 2 brothers, the Dopiero brothers. They were from Czechoslovakia. And they created this idea where they would take an acoustic guitar, and underneath this big shiny metal dome, which by the way is not the hubcap from a 1940 DeSoto, just nailed onto a regular guitar, it's a cover plate. Underneath that is a thin sheet of aluminum, about as thick as a modern day soda pop can, and it's been stamped into a cone shape. As a matter of fact, if you were to look inside, you would notice it looks exactly like the speaker in your television or your stereo. And it does exactly what a speaker does. The strings actually rest on an aluminum frame, and that sits on top of that thin aluminum cone. That energy from the strings vibrating makes the cone vibrate, and it makes it really loud. Quite a bit louder than any wooden guitar is ever going to be. Now, it was originally designed to be a jazz guitar, but the jazz musicians, they didn't really go for it. It was the blues and country musicians that did. Now, this instrument was originally made in California, but when the Depression hit, it just destroyed the industry, particularly in Chicago. Companies failed left and right. Now, Regal originally worked with National, or the Dobro Company, in 1930 to distribute these guitars east of the Mississippi River. And by 1934, they were building some of the bodies for them. And in 1936, they bought the rights and they bought the name, and they produced Dobros up in Chicago. This is one of the Chicago-built instruments. This is a 1937 Dobro, wood-bodied Dobro, and it's a 14-fret model, which is a little different than the original ones, which were only 12 frets. So let me wind up with one last song. This is a tune that was originally written right after the sinking of that great old ship, the Titanic. And I learned this from a 96-year-old man named Lawrence Royer when I was documenting the old music here in Illinois, who had learned it as a young boy. And I'll play it for you bottleneck slide style, which is an excellent way to play on these guitars, because that volume and that resonance that the cone gives it allows those notes to hang on. So we'll leave you with this one, and then we'll come back to do a little question and answer. All right, here we go. It was on one Sunday morning, just around 12 o'clock, when that great Titanic boat begun to reel and rock. People on board began to cry, saying they was afraid to die. And it was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, so sad. Wasn't it sad when that great ship went down? Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. Well, now they built that ship Titanic just to sail the ocean blue. And they thought they had a ship that the water wouldn't get through. But God, with the power in his hand, said that great boat would not stand. And it was sad when that great ship went down. It was sad, so sad. Wasn't it sad when that great ship went down? Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. Here we go. Well, they were not far from shore, and I knew it all before. When the rich refused to associate with the poor, so they put the poor below, where they was the first to go. And it was sad when that great ship went down. Then they swung the lifeboats out o'er the dark and the raging sea, as the band out on the deck struck up near My God to Thee. Little children screamed and cried as the waves swept o'er the side. It was sad when that great ship went down. Oh, it was sad, so sad. Wasn't it sad when that great ship went down? Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. Oh, it was sad, so sad. Wasn't it sad when that great ship went down? Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when that great ship went down. All righty, there you go. Well, if you want to know more about the old instruments that I have worked on and restored, go to orphaninstruments.com. You can see many of the ones that I've fixed up. And if you go to my own website, chrisvallillo.com, you can go and check out one of my recordings, The Last Day of Winter. And I used 16 different vintage instruments on that recording. And if you go to the liner notes, which are on the website, you can see high resolution shots of all the instruments that I used and their backstories as well. Now, once again, we hope that you will take a moment to fill out the questionnaire from the Illinois Humanities Council. And it's very, very simple. You don't have to give personal information or even your name. They just want demographic information, who you are, where you live, the kinds of things that you do. And they use this information to get national level funding to bring programs like this to Illinois. So thanks so much. Let's go back and let's talk together with Emma, and maybe we can get some questions and answers going. All right.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. I just put the link to that survey for Illinois Humanities in the chat. So please, if you have a chance, go ahead and fill that out. That would be great. And I also included a link to the History Center donation page. Again, we never ask people to pay for these programs, but if you can, we really do appreciate the funds. It helps us do things like this.
Well, and you know, I'm a firm believer in these small local museums being so critical. I worked with the Smithsonian Institution on a traveling exhibit all about this old music, roots music, and they always used to talk about how the lifeblood of our nation's collections are in these small institutions. And if they fail, there's no way that the major institutions can in any way pick up that. These are the places that tell our local stories. So please support Des Plaines History Center. It's an important part of our life and our culture.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris. If you have any questions, please feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, or I can give you a hand with that. If you are having, I know Zoom is always a little fidgety, but please feel free to jump in with anything you want to ask Chris, or if you just want to see some more of these beautiful instruments up close. I know there's some really gorgeous detailing, like I believe it was the guitar with the Hawaiian painting on it.
Yeah, the little picture guitar.
Exactly, yes. Maybe not one of the fanciest ones, but certainly a really beautiful design.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for somebody, I'll show you another one that I've got as well here.
Please, please.
Once again, picked up at a yard sale. This is a fairly rare one. It's the Continental American, and I believe it was built by getting old is a terrible thing. Harmony up in Chicago, but very patriotic themed guitar. My wife likes to hang this one on the wall for the 4th of July.
There you go. But, and again, this may be. Sorry, just a quick clarifying question. I can see sometimes a lot of folks nowadays are, they'll customize their instruments. These are all came this way from the manufacturer.
Yeah, and what they were selling you was the picture.
Yes, right.
It's another very basic birch guitar, but the idea was that it was the fancy decorating that would attract the eye. And this would have been a guitar.
It does. It does the job. Yeah.
This is going to date to the 40s or 50s, and it wouldn't have cost more than $10 or $15 in that. So very affordable, very easy to get a hold of. So let me set that back down.
Well, I mean, that is such a great. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who were able to kind of jump into instruments as young folks because of the way these are so affordable and widespread.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about them, they tend to have problems very quickly. The next warp they pull out,
Oh
the
yeah,
action can be very high. But if you take the time to fix those issues, every single one of these instruments has its own unique voice. And when I
absolutely.
did that project the last day of winter, that was the whole idea, to take instruments that were not necessarily the highest quality or the most valuable, but let them speak in, and I try to choose material and combinations of instruments that would really resonate in a unique way. And it was a fascinating project to do.
We do have a question from Raymond Kolek in the chat. He wants to know, how did you get interested in these old guitars, and if you could tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure. Well, Raymond, I began my career not as a musician, but actually as an archaeologist. And
That's a bit of a jump in careers there.
it is, but I have been told that instead of digging up bones, I dig up old songs or old guitars. But I've always had a fascination with the past and just a real deep passion for instruments. But old and vintage instruments can be very, very pricey for especially somebody who plays guitar for a living. The people that own the pre-war Martins, more of them are bankers than guitar players.
Mm.
But what I would begin to do was I would find them damaged and buy them just because I was so fascinated by them, and much like the story of this little 9-string, this one came to me as a gag gift. A friend gave it to me in the middle of a show in Peoria, Illinois, in a paper bag in pieces. And then the gag was he wouldn't leave the stage till I came up with the $2 he'd paid for it at the yard sale. But it was just the idea that each of these instruments had these unique voices, and so I would find them and begin to explore repairing them.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, I had no idea what I was doing, even in that capacity. But over the years, I've been self-taught and have gotten fairly prolific in restoring these.
I'd say, yeah. I mean, I certainly could not tell, for their age, they look wonderful. And especially in the case like that one that was in pieces,
Yeah.
to my untrained eyes, it looks great. So,
Yeah. Well, I started playing music for a living around 1979, mostly in country rock bands.
mm-hmm.
Toward the Midwest, but by about 1983, I had enough of that, and I began to perform as a soloist. But the real change for me happened in 1986 when the Illinois Arts Council approached me. Since I had been an archaeologist, they wanted to know if I would do what's called music collecting. So that's folklore work, and that's when I began to interview the oldest living musicians in West Central Illinois, folks born before the days of television and radio, and in many cases even recorded music, what they call the pre-radio generation. And this is where I started to run into all this older music. And many of the old instruments, I bought the hammer dulcimer after I had seen a number of those antique dulcimers. And again, that instrument came out of a barn and I had to restore it. But you won't hear a modern day instrument that sounds like that. But I just got really fascinated with that idea, and my anthropology and music backgrounds kind of came together.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
more and more I began to do, this historic material, combining it with my own material. A lot of the original songs I wrote, there were a number that came out based on the stories that some of these folks would tell me.
We have a couple more questions here.
Yeah, you bet.
Just a couple quick ones. First, Nancy Huck would like to know if any of these instruments are for sale. And also, I know you mentioned a couple different websites, addresses throughout your talk. If you are able to share those with us and maybe send an email and we can share that with everyone, I think some folks would be interested in that as well.
Absolutely. Well, there are a number of them. I'm trying to think if any of the ones I played today are actually for sale. One of the problems you run into when you restore old guitars and you love them is that you have a hard time letting go of them.
Absolutely. You put a lot of love into these, I can tell.
Yeah, but I do sell quite a few because, quite frankly, I have reached the point where I can't keep them all. And during the COVID crisis, I kind of shifted gears and moved into that, and I probably sold 16 or 18 in the last year.
Oh, wonderful!
And that basically was a good side stream of income to help get through this difficult time.
And can people visit your website maybe, or how would they be able to get in touch with you?
The website I mentioned, Orphan Instruments, and it's just one word, orphan like a stranded child, instruments, of course, .com, has many of the ones that I have already sold and a few that are still for sale, so you can look there. And then my website has more information about who I am and ways to contact me. Orphan Instruments is actually a sub-page on my website in the extras section. But that's just my name, chrisvallillo.com. So they could even just Google my name off of the title of the show, and it'll immediately come up. And so I have a number of instruments that are currently for sale, and about 4 I'm working on right now that will be for sale soon.
Wonderful. Well, I don't know if anyone has any last minute questions. Otherwise, we'll let you go for the evening. But this has been just some wonderful pieces of music, as well as getting to see some of these beautiful instruments up close. Some of these, like the last one you showed us, I was not even aware that such a thing existed.
Well, and the thing about that fascinates me is I always think of those as instruments built in the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea until I started to research that they're actually Chicago instruments in many cases. And that one in particular, when I had the opportunity to get it, I wanted to get it specifically because I knew it was one that had been built up in Chicago.
Yeah, I as someone who is not a musician, you kind of have in your head this idea of what a guitar is, and this is such a wonderful range of guitars, like stringed instruments that you don't necessarily, kind of come to mind.
Yes. So I'm sure there are many more of these hanging out in people's attics or basements. So don't throw them away. There's wonderful stories to tell through these instruments, and there's still a lot of great music to be played through these instruments.
Wonderful. Well, yes, if anyone else has any last minute questions, feel free. We'll let you can visit Chris's website or contact him directly through that. And of course, we'll be happy to make sure we get those links out to you as well. And again, just a quick reminder, if you haven't had a chance, please do fill out that survey for Illinois Humanities.
Yes, indeed. And thanks again very much to you, Emma, and to Philip and Des Plaines History Center for the important work that you're doing. Really appreciate the opportunity to work with you.
It was our pleasure. This is fantastic. And hopefully, knock on wood, we'll get to the point where we're able to go back to in-person programs soon.
It's coming. It is coming indeed.
Oh, we can hope, right?
Yes. And a big shout out to Illinois Humanities for making all this possible.
Absolutely. They do wonderful work and are really able to help us do a lot of things like this.